right. Okay. So we're going to start where more or less where we left off. We are at chapter 11 of the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 11. And you'll find, and we're going to begin with verse 13. 11, 13, page 1052. 1052. So, and the first passage that we're going to look at should be quite familiar. Well, if you daven regularly at any event, this is the second paragraph of the Shema, which is repeated in our services in the morning and in the evening. We've already seen the first paragraph. We looked at it closely together. That's the paragraph that begins Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad v'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, right? You should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your might, with all your might. And we saw that back, I think it was chapter 6, perhaps. But now, and it was taken straight from the book of Deuteronomy. Now we're going to come to the second of 3 passages that make up the Shema. And this one you'll see here from chapter 11. The third passage, which we're not going to look at, actually comes from the book of Deuteronomy, and it deals with putting tzitzit, putting fringes on the corners of your garment. This is the second one. Now, the first one, you probably remember, is about loving God. And you need to love God entirely. And as a result, then we need to do what God commands us to do, out of love. The theme here in the second paragraph is very different. I'll just say that, and then I'll move in to begin to look at it. So again, we are in Eitz Chaim, page 1052. We are in chapter 11, verse 13. V'haya im shamoa tishmeru, if you will obey my commandments that I enjoin you this day, to love God and serve God with all your heart and soul, right? So love God, serve God, and heart and soul is an interesting expression. B'chol levavchem u'b'chol nafshechem. Your whole heart. The heart is, and it's important to understand this, in the Torah, I'm sure I've mentioned this before, it is the seat of intellect. When you talk about loving God wholeheartedly, it means your mind, in your thoughts, right? It is not emotion, right? And that, of course, we see the heart as the seat of emotion.
Right.
I love you with all my heart. I'm just so in love with you, right? That's not this. It's not this at all, right? In ancient times, people saw the heart as the seat of the intellect, right? And actually emotions were in the kidneys. Right? A little known fact. Right? So, I mean, it's kind of arbitrary if you think about it. I mean, why should we say that our feelings are in our heart, which basically is there to pump blood, right? But of course, if we get excited, our feelings, makes the heart pound faster. So there is some connection. For our ancestors, your whole heart meant your whole mind. And then there's your nefesh. V'chol nafshecha, with your whole nefesh. Here it's soul. It's hard to say what the word nefesh really means. It probably originally had to do with breath. Right? There's an expression in Hebrew that higia mayim ad nafshi. The water has come up to my nefesh. Right? Probably because you're about to drown. Right? It's not. So nefesh seems to be breath. It seems to be life force, something like that. Your whole being, right? or to put it in another way, your physical being. So your mental being, your physical being. At any rate, when it says all of your heart and all of your soul, it means every part of you, right? It's what's called the hendiety, which means two words which kind of mean to say everything, right? So in the beginning, or when God began to create the heaven and the earth, right? It's the heaven and the earth is everything, right? It's a way of expressing everything, right? Here, it's all of yourself that you should serve God, love God, and serve God. And if you do, now we get reward and punishment. If you do, I will grant rain to your land in season, the early rain and the late rain. Right? So remember, we saw this last time, the thing about the land of Israel is, unlike the land of Egypt, which depends for its water and therefore its sustenance, its agriculture, everything else is dependent on the Nile. The land of Israel is completely dependent on rainfall. It is the land that God watches over, and when things are good, God makes sure it rains. And if the rain stops, not going to be good. So what God is saying is, you serve me wholeheartedly, and it will rain. It will rain when it's supposed to, the early rain, the later rain, and you will be able to gather in your grain and your wine and your oil, and I will give grass to the fields for your cattle, and you will eat your fill. But take care not to be lured to serve other gods and bow down to them. Right? Don't serve them. Don't prostrate yourself. Why? Because God's anger will flare up against you, right? God will have a visceral reaction. This is so intolerable to God that God will become irate. This is an image of God which is not what we often think of, right? God is a deeply emotional being who is so tied to the people of Israel as our lover, as someone who is deeply invested. And when we betray God, God will respond in anger. And what will happen? He will shut up the sky. There will be no rain, right? The ground will not yield its produce, and you will perish from the land that God is assigning. So, reward and punishment. Do what you're supposed to do. You'll get rain, eat, it'll be wonderful. If not, you will perish from this land. So a few things. First of all, this notion of reward and punishment, the thing that immediately comes to mind is the issue of theodicy. Well, what does this mean? Does this mean that, God rewards the good and punishes the bad? Well, we have seen otherwise. Right? We all know good people who suffer. We all know bad people who reach the highest heights, whose billions are able to protect them from things that ordinary people would suffer. So how do we deal with that? And I think one key to understanding this is that this, one of the things about the difference between English and Hebrew is that Hebrew has, in English, we use the word you as both singular and plural, right? Whereas in Hebrew, we have different words, right? And the you here is plural, right? In other words, this is not about any individual Israelite. It is collective. And in fact, the whole community is responsible. Even if you're a good person, if you allow immorality in your community, you will suffer the consequence, right? So there is a sense that the community as a whole is being judged. And you think about rainfall, that makes sense, right? Because right? It doesn't fall on one person's house and not on another person's house. This is all about the whole, right? And there are consequences, says this paragraph, to your behavior. And so we have a sense of reward and punishment. And then it's going to go on, and we're going to see something that is extremely similar to what we see in the first paragraph. But before we do that, I just want to pause here and sort of think about, first of all, Moses says this twice. Right? First, he says the Shema Yisrael, and then he says this, and they're going to end the same way. And that's not unusual. Moses says a lot of things more than one. He constantly trying to drill it into the people because they'll go into the land. Moses won't be there, and he's got to get it so embedded that they will do what they should do even when he's not there. But there's a subtle difference here. We are to serve God according to the first paragraph of the Shema out of love, because we listen to the people that we love and we want to do, for them what they want or need. It's that basic. We don't take care of our children. If we have children, we don't take care of them because if we neglect them, we're going to be sent to jail. It's true. We might be sent to jail, especially if they're young. But that's not why we take care of them. We take care of them because we love them. Right? Straightforward. And our sense of obligation is not about reward and punishment. But with God, it's not so easy to love God. Right? So we need a second. We need something to reinforce this message. And here we get consequences. All right? I don't know how you feel about God, but you better do the right thing. Because if not, you're going to suffer and everybody's going to suffer. And now we get this paragraph, the end of this, which is just like what we see in the first paragraph, right? Therefore, take these words to heart, bind them as a sign on your hand, let them serve as a symbol on your forehead, right? This we understand literally to be the pagan, right? That you should take the words, put them in a capsule, wrap that capsule with straps around your arm and between your eyes. Tefillin, it's supposed to be there as a reminder and as a commitment. One of the things that's said when you put on tefillin on your hand is a verse from Hosea, "Erastich li leolam," I betroth myself to you forever. That sense of betrothal, it's like a wedding ring, right? So, and we have this idea, though we do it physically, is that it should be between our eyes. That's how we see the world, through the lens of our relationship with God and our actions on our hand, right? Just as God took us out of Egypt with an outstretched arm, metaphorically, so our arms, our actions should be guided by this. But it's concretized in tefillin, and these are a sign, oath. And the question then is, well, why don't we wear tefillin on Shabbat? And the answer is Shabbat is also described as a sign. It is oti leolam, an eternal sign, an eternal witness between us and God, the institution of Shabbat. And so tefillin in that case are superb. At least that's how it's understood. At any rate, we have tefillin, and then we have mezuzah. You have to teach these words, right? You have to teach your children all the time. This is another hendiety, right? When you lie down and when you rise up, right? All the time. You should always be teaching, right? You should always be passing this along. And then also, they should be on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, right? So The gates are, of course, the gates of a city. That's the place where judgment was performed. That's where judges sat, right? But on the doorposts of your house, what's understood here, remember that people in ancient times, most people did not have dwelling places with many rooms, right? The doorposts of your house, certainly in biblical terms, mean the entrance and exit to your home. Now, it's later understood, and in Jewish law, we find it, that really other doorposts, internal doorposts, should also have a mezuzah, with the exception of rooms that people don't live in or bathrooms, but there is this sense. But biblically, we're talking about the doorway to your house. This is what's called a liminal space. It's a space of transition, right? You're either outside or you're inside, you're in the world or you're in your home. And this idea that we have there a sign as we leave the house, that we go into the world and we are following what God asks us to do. And our house itself is a place where God's word is to be lived out. So again, the idea is everywhere. And not only that, but you do it wherever you are, when you're at home, when you're away, when you lie down, right? So we have these reminders, and all of this is again about not only loving God, but obeying God and following God's commandments. And what we're going to get to, for most of the book very soon, are those commandments. So before I go on in just a minute, I'm going to open it up because we just really have talked about the Shema. And I want to give you an opportunity, if anyone has a question about it, this would be a good time. Sandy, go ahead.
So, Rabbi, when it says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul," so that it also, the Shema that we know says all your might, right?
Yes, right. And
why is that?
There, right? So the two of them are meant to, and as we take it into our liturgy, right? They're meant to supplement each other, right? The first one is about love. The second one is about consequences, right? The first one, all of your might, right, is understood in the tradition to be with your wherewithal, your wealth, right? I don't think the omission here is significant, simply because it's not like it's being repeated to clarify. Well, I said that, but I don't mean it here, right? I think it's they're both statements, both times we have this passage, are really meant simply to say, all the time, with everything you have, always obey. Okay. Any other quick questions about this? If not, we're going to go.
Sir, can I ask you?
Hi, Maddie. Glad to have you.
Hello.
And if for you and anyone else just joining us, we are on page 1053 in the Eitz Chaim. We're picking up with verse 22 of chapter 11:22. Sandy.
Can I ask you another question?
Yeah.
So I was just struck by the fact that when we say the prayer for, I'm not sure if it's for the rain or for Tal, that there we don't say, it's not dependent on our deeds, but upon, it says, the merit of our ancestors. So right. Here, it's different there.
Yes. So, one thing that we're always trying to make the best arguments we can. Moses does this too, right? So maybe we haven't all observed your commandments, but remember our ancestors, right?
Right.
But in other words, we're not giving up. Okay, we're doing our best here, but we know, you're a forgiving God, and remember the deal, and I mean, I think it's really that. I think it's that, and I'm thinking of the language on Yom Kippur. We are not so brazen as to say we are without sin. We have sinned, Hashamnu, Bagadnu, and so on, right? So if we need rain, we are doing our best, and we need it. By the way, this whole idea of rain, what do you do when the rain doesn't fall? And there's a whole liturgy about what to do when it doesn't rain and you need rain. And part of it is public fasting to show God, well, we're contrite, right? It's not raining, it must be us, right? So we're serious, we're going to fast, we're asking for your forgiveness, and so on.
Thank you.
So, okay. If there is nothing else, we're going to pick up now verse 22. And if you will faithfully keep all this instruction, this mitzvah, that I command you to love your God, walk in God's ways, and hold fast to him. And this, we have three things there, right? Love God, walk in God's ways, which means, obey God, walk in the ways that God has chosen you to walk. And of course, walking is lalechet, and that means halakha. Halakha is a pathway. We translate it as Jewish law, and that's what it means. But it's also a pathway. That's what walking in God's ways means. It means following the mitzvah that God has commanded. And then davka bo, to cling to God. It's love, but it's not a distant love. It's not like, oh yes, God. It's, oh God. There's this sense of really, really, and God also has that for us, right? That longing and desire. Okay, so if you do all that, then God will dislodge the nations before you, and you'll dispossess them. And even though they're mightier and more numerous, and then we get this statement: every spot on which your foot treads shall be yours. Your territory will extend from the wilderness to the Lebanon, and the river Euphrates to the western sea. No man will stand up to you. The Lord your God will put the dread and fear on you over the whole land in which you set foot, as God promised. I just want to take note of this idea where your foot treads, right? Asher tirdof kaf raglecha, where it's not just your foot, right? Where you walk, where you step. This is really not merely understood as kind of poetic speech. In ancient times, how do you acquire something, right? So with an object, it's easy, right? You're handed the object, you take possession of the object. It is now, assuming that you compensated the person who's giving it to you, it's now yours. It's an act of acquisition, of kinyan, right? You need, in Judaism in general, and certainly in the Talmudic world, you need some act of kinyan, of giving and accepting. How do you do that with land? The answer is you walk the land. In order to acquire the land, you need to walk it. And I want to just turn back for 1 minute to, you don't have to look, it's just the verse, I'll read it. But it's back in Genesis chapter 13, verse 17. God has given Abraham the land of Israel. And God's made this promise that he'll have a lot of offspring. And I'm just reading here, actually beginning with verse 15. 14. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had left him, raise your eyes and look from where you are to the north, the south, the east, the west. I give all the land that you see to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth so that no one can count them. Up, walk the land through its length and its breadth, for I give it to you. Right? That's about acquisition. It's not like, hey, I give you this beautiful thing, go check it out. It's not that. It is, but it's not merely that. This is about actually acquiring it. And so I think when it says here, every spot where your foot will tread, that's what it's talking about. Okay, we are moving on to a new parsha. So if you're in Eitz Chaim or another Humash, you have to go past now the Haftorah, and we enter Re'eh. And we start with really a striking phrase, which we will see again and again in the book of Deuteronomy. Re'eh anochi noten lifnechem hayom habracha v'hakala. See, today I set before you the blessing and the curse. This is about, and elsewhere later on it says, I will put before you life and death, therefore choose life, right? Similar kind of language, right? In other words, I'll bless you, do the right thing, and if you don't, there will be negative consequences. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, I enjoin upon you this day, blessing if you obey, and curse if you do not obey, and turn away from the path that I enjoined you, to follow other gods who you have not experienced. And that phrase, who you have not experienced, is an interesting one, right? In other words, what is the difference between God, the true God, and the gods of the other nations, which, by the way, they are perfectly entitled to worship? This is only about Israel. Only Israel is required to worship Adonai, and there are consequences if we don't, and there are consequences if we don't obey, and so on. Because we have experienced God. We were the ones who were there when God took us out of Egypt. Right? The word experienced here is you have not known, right? Asher lo yadatem, you didn't know. And remember that knowing in the Bible is intimacy. And Adam knew his wife, right? It wasn't about getting acquainted, right? He knew her, they had children. That's intimacy, right? What's being stated here is that we have an intimate relationship with God, unlike any other God. And therefore, what? Therefore, if we betray that intimacy, then there are real consequences. Because we are in an exclusive relationship with a very powerful deity, right? All right. So, when the Lord your God brings you to the land you are about to enter and possess, you will pronounce blessings on Mount Gerizim and a curse on Mount Ebal. Both are on the other side of the Jordan, beyond the west road that is in the land of the Canaanites who dwell in the Arava near Gilgal by the terebinth of Mored. Okay, so this is an allusion here. Blessings and curses on Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, which actually does get enacted. This is not metaphorical. This is an actual action. I'm going to jump ahead because we're certainly not going to see it this year. So I want to jump ahead to an actual description of the people of Israel being told what will happen when they enter into the land. And I'm just going to read it very quickly, just to give you a sense of what's being suggested here. It's chapter 27 of the book of Deuteronomy. Moses and the elders of Israel charged the people, observe all the instruction that I enjoin you this day. As soon as you have crossed the Jordan into the land the Lord your God is giving you, you should set up large stones, coat them with plaster, inscribe upon them all the words of this teaching. Right? So they're supposed to they're going into the land. What are they going to do? They're going to get some large stones and they're going to plaster them over and they're going to write on them. They're going to write the words of the Torah, and they're going to be there. When you go through into the land, you're going to see them. So what does that remind you of? It should remind you of what we looked at earlier today. It's a mezuzah on the land, right? Right? And this is like, hey, you're entering this place. These are the laws you are expected to follow in this place. A land flowing with milk and honey. Upon crossing the Jordan, you should set up these stones about which I charge you on Mount Ebal and cover them with plaster. There too you will build an altar, right? And then it goes on, and I'm skipping a little bit. Moses and the Levitical priests spoke to the people of Israel, saying, and then it goes on in verse 11. Therefore Moses charged the people, saying, after you have crossed the Jordan, the following shall stand on Mount Gerizim to bless when the blessing for the people is spoken. And then we get tribes: Shimon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Yosef, and Benjamin. And for the curse, the following will stand on Mount Ebal: Reuben, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, right? And then the Levites will proclaim in a loud voice to the people of Israel. And then we get a series of curses. Right? If you do this, you'll be cursed. If you do that, you'll be cursed. I don't want to go into them because they'll be, we'll get to them eventually. But what we're looking at here is a ceremony entering the land of Israel, where the people are going to be divided on these two mountains. The priests are going to stand in between them, and these blessings and curses, which we were talking about kind of metaphorically, so they are going to be. I like to think of this almost like booting up a computer. We're putting in the operating system. Because now we're in the land, and this is what's going to be in the land. So it's a dramatic ceremony. I just read something which I thought was really interesting. Mount Gerizim is covered with vegetation, and Mount Ebal has none. It's bare. So it's a beautiful sort of visual representation of blessings and curses. Oh. Why are these mountains chosen? Well, first of all, you come to them when you go into the land of Israel by a certain route, which is the route that the people are taking. But I think it's also a dramatic visual image. Okay. We're jumping ahead and picking up with verse 31. You're about to cross the Jordan, enter and possess the land that God is assigning you. When you've entered and occupied it, observe all the laws. And now we're going to begin to get laws, beginning in chapter 12. These are the laws and the rules that you must observe. You must destroy all sites in which the nations you are to dispossess worship their gods, whether on lofty mountains or hills or under every luxuriant tree. Tear down their altars, smash their pillars, put their sacred posts to the fire, cut down the images of their gods, obliterating their name from that site. So we have lots of pagan worship places. These are not being described as temples necessarily. They're cultic sites. They might be, on high places. They might be under a tree that is particularly symbolic. There are little idols. You got to eliminate all. The sense here is that the Canaanite religion will be a snare. It will lead you away. It will lead you to abandon the God of your ancestors and worship them. And the argument is sort of like this. Well, we want fertility in this land. We want to prosper. Yeah, Moses said something about that. I don't remember what, but I know this is what the pagans did for fertility. They went to these sites and they worshiped, and they beseeched their gods to give them rain and so on, and they got it. So that's how it works here, right? This idea that gods are kind of localized. If you're in the land of the Canaanites and you want things to go there well, you better talk to the Canaanite gods because this is their territory, right? So this is a real lure in a way. You're going to be in their territory, but their gods, it's not that. You need to obey our God, right? And so every remnant, and I have to say, of course, for us, I'm sure you remember, perhaps you remember, the Taliban, who took those massive ancient Buddha statues, toppled them, destroyed them, part of the cultural heritage of humanity, right? I mean, there's something disturbing about this, I think, just as it's disturbing to think about getting rid of all those inhabitants. But here the idea really is that this is your land and it's God's land. And you have an intimate relationship with God, and we have to remove all temptation. So, and then it goes on to say, and this is unique. Oh, one more thing. The next verse, do not worship the Lord your God in like manner. So, like this sentence can be understood really in two ways. It could be referring to in a manner like to what the inhabitants did. In other words, don't worship idols. Don't worship their gods. Destroy all traces of that and don't worship in the way they did. Or it could mean, and Rashi brings this, and it's so interesting, their stuff needs to be utterly obliterated, but not the stuff of your God. And Rashi says, it's from here that we learn that sacred texts cannot be destroyed. In other words, this is the biblical basis for the idea that you can't just throw an old prayer book in the garbage, right? That things that have God's name on them, sacred texts, have to be treated with respect, right? They are buried, they're put in a geniza. We do something to acknowledge their respect. And this tradition, I mean, it goes so far, there's a tradition that if you drop a prayer book, you pick it up and kiss it. That sense of real reverence for it. And what Rashi is pointing out here is that this verse could, in a sense, destroy everything of theirs and get rid of it, but don't do that. You can't destroy the stuff of your God. I don't think that's what it means. That's not the pshat, the basic meaning of the text, but Rashi is grounding. And of course, we do see this. We saw it with the tablets, where the broken tablets are also gathered and put into the ark. They're not destroyed. Okay, and then we are being told they worshipped in all kinds of places, on high mountains and so on. You only are allowed to worship in one place. This is the great, this idea we find only in the book of Deuteronomy. It's central to the book of Deuteronomy. And it means what the place that God will choose. That's where you worship God, in the place where God will choose. Not anywhere else. But now we know this isn't followed. We know that we go into the time of the judges after the people come into the land, and the time of Joshua and the judges and the King David, and there are multiple sites where people are going. The story of Hannah, who goes, she wants a child, they make an annual pilgrimage to Shiloh. Shiloh is a place where there's a worship site to God, and they bring sacrifice. This is saying that's not legitimate. And this is one of the reasons why many scholars today believe that the book of Deuteronomy was written much, much later. It was written in the time of King Josiah. It wasn't really, it is put in this form as though it's Moses, but what it's reflecting, this idea of the centralization of the cult, really doesn't take place until much later. And in fact, the early books beyond the Torah, the early books of historical books of the prophets, don't seem to have any problem with worship at Shiloh. But no one seems to think that's an issue. It seems completely legitimate. The problem at Shiloh that we see in the book of Samuel is that the priests there are corrupt, not that they're not allowed to have a cultic site at Shiloh. That's a whole other story at any rate. But here we're being told that God's choosing a place, and that's where you'll go. And it's the place where God chooses. This is a little bit, we're not being told where that is. God will designate. This reminds me a lot of God's commanding Abraham to go to make the sacrifice, right? To sacrifice his son, right? Take your son, your only son, and go to the place that I will show you, right? Now, it turns out that both of those are talking about the same place, at least rabbinically, right? That the place of the near sacrifice of Isaac is the Temple Mount, according to rabbinic tradition. And this is, of course, the same place that God will designate. Okay, so look to the site that, and by the way, this makes things very difficult. Don't you want to live near a shul? And we have communities where we have 6 synagogues. They used to have the Lower East Side there. You could go 2 blocks and there'd be 4 shuls, right? I mean, this idea that you want God to be close and accessible, and you want to go with the community there. This is saying, oh, no, one spot. And when you want to be there, well, you're going to have to schlep. Your family, you're going to have to go there. And the Torah is going to talk about 3 pilgrimages a year to do that. Unclear whether that was done. I mean, the Muslims have Mecca and they have a pilgrimage once in a lifetime. And if you don't do the Hajj, okay, you didn't do it, right? It's kind of like it's a spiritual opportunity, but it's not on the level of requirement. This seems to be a requirement 3 times a year. Go for these holidays. At any rate, and we'll see this, but just to mention it here. So how do you do that? How do you go with all your flocks and so on to this place where you're going to celebrate all the holidays? Well, the book of Deuteronomy has a solution. Take your stuff, sell it, take the money, go to Jerusalem, buy new animals, and sacrifice, right? Because it's difficult. And then the rabbis are asking, well, how do all those people fit in Jerusalem? Where do they sleep? How does this work? Right? I mean, what's being envisioned is so radical that it's really it's breathtaking. But it is central here, and we're going to see it again and again. It's central to the book of Deuteronomy that you need to go only to this place. And what is it about this place? It is the place where God has chosen Lashum et Shemo Sham, which, by the way, is a nice alliterative phrase, right? Lashum et Shemo Sham, to place God's name there. Now, when we're talking about God's the Mishkan, the desert sanctuary, the portable sanctuary that went with the people, God dwelled there. Right? There was a sense that God's presence was somehow there, right? And therefore it was very specific dimensions, and it had made in a certain way, and only the priests could go in, and only at a certain time, because there was danger. This is not that. This is the place where God establishes God's name. This is God's outpost, not where God is. This is God's embassy. This is a place where if you want to connect to God, you do it through this place. But God doesn't live there. God's presence is there. For the book of Deuteronomy, God is in heaven. God is not on earth. There's no sense of God's presence on earth. A lot of the Torah of the Bible really does see God, not literally living there so much, but being present there. Talk about God's Shekhinah, God's presence, inhabiting. We talk about how, once the tabernacle is complete, God's presence comes into it and fills it. That is not the language of a place where I choose to place my name. So God is more distant here. You have to really travel to get to. Okay, there to that place you are to go, and there you are to bring your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, your contributions, your free will offerings, the firstlings of your flocks, together with your household. Right? You not only go alone. This is not the idea. And we saw this also in the Exodus a little bit. Remember in the story of the Exodus, Pharaoh looks like he's going to relent. And Moses has been asking him, let us go 3 days away and we're going to worship our God and we'll come back. Right? This is not true. It's not what they intend, but he's trying to, in some ways, I think he's trying to give Pharaoh a way of saving face. At any rate, or maybe he's just trying to trick him. It's not so clear. Anyway, he says, so then Pharaoh says, Mi umi hochi, who will go? And Moses says, with our old and our young, we will go. With our children, we will go. With our flocks, we will go. We will go to worship. And Pharaoh says, no way. The men can go. That's it, right? And that's not, in a certain sense, Pharaoh wants to hold them hostage. But there was also this idea that it was really about the men. That who goes to worship, it's the men, right? And we saw this, and we see this to a certain extent in Judaism, even today, among certain Jews, right? That men have the obligation to go to shul, right? Women can go, but maybe they'll sit in the back, maybe they'll sit, it doesn't not so matter if they can hear, they can see, don't worry. The guys have to be there, they have to be close, right? Here, what the Torah is saying is no way. You think it's hard to schlep there? Not only do you schlep there, the whole family has to schlep. All right. And then it goes on in verse 15. Let me read the rest of this too. You shall rejoice before the Lord your God with your sons, your daughters, your slaves, with the Levite who has no territorial allotment. Everybody goes. Take care not to sacrifice in any place you like, only in the right place. There you'll sacrifice. But here comes something new. Whenever you desire, you may slaughter and eat meat in any of your settlements, according to the blessing that the Lord your God has granted you. The impure and the pure, that is, those who are pure, the priests, as well as the impure, everybody else, may partake of it as of the gazelle and the deer. You can eat meat. You don't have to be at the sanctuary to do it. It doesn't have to be a sacrifice. And you can eat more than just the animals that are appropriate for sacrifice. You can eat other kosher animals. The deer and the gazelle are kosher animals. Perfectly okay to eat venison, you just have to slaughter it properly. That's not so easy to achieve, right? But the idea here is the cult is centralized. It used to be that the only time people ate meat was sacrificially. That was the way, and they did it locally, right? And the priests got to eat a little bit, and the people ate a little bit, and so on. This is revolutionary. No, only in Jerusalem. That's the place that God will choose to put God's name. Only in Jerusalem. But we wouldn't want you to, God forbid, have to be vegetarian. I'm being facetious here, right? Okay, you can eat meat, and you can eat it wherever you want, and as long as it's a kosher animal. So the two go hand in hand. You really can't have one without the other. And then it goes on to say, the impure and the pure, you may partake of it, of the gazelle and the deer, but you must not partake of the blood. You shall pour it out on the ground like wood. Now, it was true in the sacrificial service that you couldn't eat it, right? And in fact, in the Mishkan and in the temple later on, what do you do with the blood? You spritz it on the altar. Because the blood is the life, in the biblical worldview, the blood is the life of the animal, the lifeblood, right? And that's what you're giving the life of the animal as your sacrifice. And so the idea was to sprinkle it on the altar, and then you would eat the rest. So here you're not going to Jerusalem. It's not a sacrifice. What do you do with the blood? You're not going to sprinkle it on an altar, and therefore you pour it out onto the ground. And elsewhere we're told you should put it onto the ground and cover. All right. And you may not partake in your settlements of the tithes, the grain, the wine, the oil, the firstlings of your flocks, etc. You must consume in the place of your God, and God will bless you, and so on. So I'm going to stop here. We have just a few minutes left, and I do want to open it for questions. So any questions? Any of this? Yes, Hannah. You're muted.
The text said Mount Ebal was one of those mountains. What is that called now? In Hebrew, where would that be?
I don't know where these mountains are. Mount Gerizim, I know, is actually sacred to the Samaritans, who are a group who live in the land of Israel. But I really don't know the location of these places. I don't know. There's a map at the back of Eitz Chaim. I doubt that it's shown there. So, no, I don't see any mountains. Yeah, just I don't know. What I would suggest that, when I don't know things like this, I have a classic rabbinic source that I consult, and that is Rabbi Google. And I would suggest, if you would, to see what Rabbi Google has to say about this, and perhaps you'll get an answer there. I find Google enormously useful for all kinds of things like that. If I try to remember where's the verse that says X or Y, I just Google it, Google a phrase from it, and there it comes up. It's enormously useful. Okay, any other questions? Yes, no, yes. Okay, so I want to wish you all a great week. We are back on track. We will pick up next time where we're leaving off. And Israel Independence Day is coming up, and I want to wish you a happy Yom HaAtzmaut. Today, sadly, is Yom HaShoah, as we remember, of course, the victims of the Shoah today. And So it's important to take note of that as well. Okay, I see you next week. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.